I will just say this much that, and actually I did too at the top of the hour. Um, he describes himself as a prototypical New Yorker, um, but he's probably more of a global citizen. He has over 12 years of experience as an environmental urban planner, researcher, policy analyst, political strategist, consultant, and organizer. His professional experience has covered a broad range, including, but not limited to, corporate and nonprofit environmental consulting firms, grassroots political campaigns, and healthcare advocacy and outreach. And as I mentioned uh, earlier, I first encountered him this past Tuesday attending a webinar of um, Black faith leaders who had recently visited Palestine. So let's see, where are you, Anthony? Are you on?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Okay. Well, let me find you.
I'm I'm actually to the right of you on my screen at the top left.
Okay. Got it. So we're happy you're here. You are in South America. Are you in Ecuador now? Because you're
I just got
bouncing.
Yeah, I just got back from Ecuador yesterday. We're down here working with Afro-descendant communities. The Afro-descendant community in Colombia, of course, has really come a long way in the last 30 years, which of course was culminated with the election of the nation's first Afro-descendant woman vice president, the great Francia Marquez, who I work with frequently. And in Ecuador, that process is definitely still rather in coat, but in Ecuador has a big laundry list of challenges associated with anti-blackness. So they're sort of more of that in their embryo phase, but definitely poised to make it happen. So been bouncing. I come down here about every other month, and it's with my family lives here in Cali as well.
Wow. Um, let me just ask, I don't know if it's on your end, but I'm hearing some background sounds. Not at the moment.
You're not hearing, oh, well, if you're hearing background sounds, that's likely like salsa music because it's Sunday.
Okay.
So,
No,
I
I
mean,
was hearing talking. I was hearing
oh,
talking.
talking. Okay.
All right. I'm gonna give it to you and just take it away, Anthony.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, first and foremost, thanks for the invitation, David, and to everyone who's on. I guess thanks for listening to me blather. I'm gonna try to keep it as short as possible because I would really more like to field any questions y'all have, or really, maybe there's just some topics where we engender an organic discussion. I think that'll be more fun than listening to someone speak at you for a long period of time. Even though I am a West African Jew and from Brooklyn, so I do have the tendency to be loquacious, but I'm definitely going to try to check myself using a tool that I actually learned from my rabbi. She will put like a little stopwatch on the pulpit when she's speaking and just kind of take a look at how long she's been talking. So I'm going to start mine now. So that said, yes, Anthony Karifa Rogers-Wright. I use him, his pronouns. I in addition to policy coordination and advice for both the Movement for Black Lives and the Black Alliance for Peace, I'm a member of both. I kind of been bouncing around since leaving the nonprofit world per se. I just kind of needed a hiatus from that. I think no one should serve in the army for more than 3 years. Is my mantra on nonprofits. So I'm kind of in my imposed sabbatical year, or it could be longer than that, and doing a lot of writing. And so when Sabine offered this opportunity to, obviously travel to Palestine to bear witness, it was an easy decision for me to make. Um, the trip we just got back from, it's been like only 2 weeks, but it always feels like yesterday, and it also feels like 10 years ago. But that was actually our second attempt to go. So the first time we had planned to go was when the Islamic Republic of Iran had sent some missiles and drones the first time. And we our trip got canceled like literally while we were in the air. So this we were really excited that we were able to do this trip. And we decided after the second round of hostilities between the state of Israel and the and Iran that we were still going to go, that we're just going to do it, and we're going to trust in our faith and each other, that and our people on the ground, that we're going to be okay. So first and foremost, I mean, it was strategic and necessary for us to go through Jordan. There is, if you will, a bit easier of a time getting, one, out of the airport. Ben Gurion right now in Tel Aviv is a fortress, and two, the reason why we were there was a bit more accepted once we got to the Israeli border, which of course in itself was very harrowing, and we'll get to that. But yeah, I just felt that as a proud anti-Zionist Jewish person, who does not like seeing what is being done in the name of my faith right now, it was extremely important for me to go, and to go, quite frankly, with a group of anti-Zionist Christians who were Black, including the daughter and granddaughter of the great Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa, and that was also just an experience in itself. We actually got into a few arguments, but that's good. That's good. Arguments are good, and that's what's up. And we still love each other very much. But so a few things before I get into, what I think are important takeaways is that, one, just this, since we have been back, right, in 2 weeks, the Israeli Knesset has essentially outlawed UNRWA, which is the United Nations refugee service provider for the Palestinian people specifically. So they essentially can no longer operate in the occupied West Bank, which Israel does consider a part of itself because it has jurisdiction over it. So right now, any UNRWA activities, if there are any right now, are basically outlawed, and people who are taking part could be risking jail time. And that's particularly hard because one of the last days we were there, we spent time, about 3 hours at UNRWA, and we were making a plea to the United States to reinstitute funding to UNRWA, because about 40% of UNRWA's funding comes directly from the United States. There was a particular incident regarding allegations of UNRWA workers being aligned with or directly participating with Hamas, later debunked, and other countries have reinstituted their money, but the United States didn't. But right now, it wouldn't matter anyway because they can't operate. So that's important. And then two, I mean, just this past weekend alone, we know about 50 Palestinian children were killed and by another Israeli airstrike, and that there are essentially no more functioning hospitals in the Gaza Strip. So this is happening while we were there, and this is happening since we have been there. This is happening, just 2 days and change before this nation or the United States makes a decision on who will be the next commander in chief, and it's all, it's a lot. It's a lot. So we'll start there. I also think that it's important, and what I learned over there, first and foremost, was, don't separate Gaza from the occupied West Bank, right? Like Palestine is Palestine, and what their belief is that this bifurcation of the West Bank and Gaza, even though they may have different governments, right? I mean, it's akin to, I grew up in New York City, and New York is adjacent to Pennsylvania, but the politics are very different, and there are two different governments that are running it, but they're still part of the United States of America. So, this idea of trying to bifurcate Gaza from the West Bank, in their belief, is a tool that's engendered and maintained by the current occupying entity. And then secondly, I think it's really important, really, really, really salient, actually, to understand and hold the truth that what we're seeing right now did not commence on 10/7/2023, right? This is going back 80 years and 100 years, and really even going back to the late 1800s, right? That commenced this idea that this region of the world could be partitioned in the view of mainly Britain and France, right? Who, of course, pit Arabs against each other, leading up to World War One. So people like Faisal and his sons Hussein, who were made benefactors of made up areas like Transjordan, now Jordan, and Kuwait and Iraq and whatnot. So this goes back well beyond 10/7/2023, though we must agree that 10/7/2023 is a major flashpoint in this tragic story of colonization, of white supremacy ideology, and essentially an idea that a group of people have the right to subjugate and oppress another group of people. And this was seen on full display. I mean, I purposely brought my copy of Ta-Nehisi Coates's, the message, and was taking like furious, notes, while I was reading it there and experiencing a lot of what he wrote about. I would argue that Ta-Nehisi is obviously a brilliant writer and a very gifted brother, but from my vantage point, I think he was pulling some of his punches. Jim Crow is definitely one way to describe what is happening. Apartheid is another way to describe what is happening. But what it really is ethnic, cleansing and oppression. That's what's happening here, and that goes beyond apartheid. And I would say Jim Crow, because the irony of Jim Crow is that Jim Crow wanted to, and still does, oppress and suppress Black people, but did not necessarily want to be rid of them, right? They still saw some value in Black people as it pertained to cheap and bad labor that they didn't want to do, including looking after their children, by the way. But which I say that because I always think it's funny, all the racial stereotypes about Black people being lazy and barbaric, yet so many white people let us take care of their babies. So it's like, what does that say about what you think about your babies? Whole nother discussion. But there was still a need for there to be some form of labor, and that was Black people for, the most horrendous jobs, which is why, in fact, when the Great Migration commenced, right, which is the period of Black people saying, we're out of here, Harriet Tubman had to do it by secret. We can just leave now. There were actual initiatives by segregationists to try to prevent the massive exodus of Black people to the industrial North because they needed them for the labor. That's not the case, in Israel Palestine. The goal is definitely ethnic cleansing. The goal is to kill as many of these people and get as many of them to either leave voluntarily or be forced to leave as possible. That's the idea. And this is most pronounced and clearly with the continued expansion of settlements, right? And just the fact that a lot of these settlements are people who are not from the region, people from New York who are moving there. There was, in fact, a tour, an ongoing tour of synagogues selling land in the West Bank to people in these synagogues for these settlements. And these settlements are strategically located, in more fertile areas that used to belong to Palestinians, in areas that have more access to fresh water, which I don't need to tell you, in an area, region like the Middle East, fresh water is imperative to literally everything. And of course, like encroaching more and more into sovereign Palestinian territory, and the daily harassment. I mean, it's yes, there's physical anguish, and many times being carried out by settlers and what we would refer to in the United States as vigilantism. This is just allowed to happen. And another way that I would say that these situations are different is like with Jim Crow, Black people did go to the same courts as white people. They weren't afforded, of course, the same level of justice under the law and Amendment 5 as white people, and that still continues today. But there was one court for both people, albeit a very racist, sexist, and patriarchal, draconian court if you were a Black person. In Palestine, that is not the case. If a settler kills a Palestinian or harms them, which happens frequently, they are subjected to a civil court. right? Like anyone on this call would be. If a Palestinian commits a crime, which includes, by the way, just flying a Palestinian flag, they are subjected to a military court. And right, and a military court, of course, can hold them in perpetuity. There are right now approximately 20,000 Palestinians who are being detained by the Israeli military, awaiting either release or awaiting court cases. So, when we say, if we're going to use and utter rhetoric like free the hostages, we have to be really, really inclusive, because what do you call a group of people who are being held against their will by a military aspect of the occupying government, right? If you want to argue that Hamas is a military wing of the Palestinian people, and it is, then and you are calling the hundreds so on remaining folk who are hostages, but not applying that to the Palestinians who are under the same conditions of military occupation and being subjected to military courts, what you're doing is you are dehumanizing Palestinians, which is also the goal, right? You dehumanize them. It is easier to kill and ethnically cleanse people. And as a Jewish person, it's eerie because this is literally the same tactics that the Nazis used. Ghettoization, dehumanization, and dehumanization, including not just physical harm, but also emotional harm, emotional trauma, which can cause a lot more angst as well, and cause people to harm each other. So that's also an element of the pogroms that Israel is using. This was learned through experience, unfortunately, by the Nazis, who, of course, learned it from the United States of America's treatment of indigenous people. One of my takeaways was that Israelism is kind of like the new Beatlemania, in the sense that the Beatles used US influences to then take rock and roll back and create something new that then became an influence for US rock and roll. The same thing happened with the oppression that we're seeing in Israel, in that they, of course, learned from the people, the Nazis, the people who learned it from the United States of America. And now Israel is seen as a premier consultant for how to police people around the world, including the United States, where, for instance, New York City Police Department has a precinct in Israel, because they're being trained by the same people who are committing a genocide right now. So that's what I mean by that Beatlemania. Israel took a US idea, perfected it, and are now the people who are influencing US ideas as it pertains to policing. The other reason why I think Coates was like, maybe pulling his punches, a bit, is also because he did not talk about the environmental aspects, the environmental warfare that the Palestinians are experiencing. Now, that is my bag, right? I've been doing environmental and climate justice, which I now believe needs to be restructured into environmental and climate liberation. And this applies to the Palestinians, and I'll get to what I mean by that. Justice, of course, is this idea of harmony, of balance. We don't get everything that we want, right? Lady Justice is holding scales that are balanced, not tipping one way or the other. That's real, and that's good. And harmony, that's also real and good. But when you have conditions like we have in the United States with environmental justice communities, especially in the Gulf South, that there is no way that there's going to be any semblance of balance or harmony until there is liberation. We have to first have liberation before we even get to a point where we can think about harmony and balance, because it's so imbalanced right now that you have to just abolish the whole system and work to get to a semblance of harmony and balance. The environmental conditions in the occupied West Bank are abysmal, are abhorrent, and are done on purpose. And the old city of Hebron, where settlers have just essentially built on top of existing Palestinian neighborhoods, to the point where Palestinian neighborhoods have gates, right, going throughout the streets, because settlers throw things like bottles, glass bottles, and sharp objects at people, and dump their raw sewage, as well, in these neighborhoods. That is definitely a form of environmental racism and a form of environmental warfare. The building of walls, of course, have all kinds of deleterious impacts on natural environments. And then, of course, I mean, just the idea that growing and harvesting olives can be considered a crime whenever the Israelis want to. So that's environmental and cultural warfare. We all know what olive trees mean, not just in terms of subsistence to the Palestinian people, but it's a cultural aspect as well. And so when you're uprooting olive trees or burning them, you are essentially also burning culture, and you're also while you're subjecting these people to the emissions from all the burning as well. Then there's this the aspect of demolishing homes. We visited a gentleman. His house got demolished like 5 days before we got there, outside of East Jerusalem, right next to I mean, settler camp. I mean, like, now that his place is rubble, when we took pictures, and I'll send some choice pictures to David to share with you. But like you can see an Israeli flag sort of hovering in the background for where a settlement like exists. So the demolition of homes takes a lot of fossil fuels and releases a lot of fugitive dust. So that's one aspect of disproportionate impacts to toxic emissions, but also just uprooting someone from their home. Sometimes we call it gentrification. Sometimes we call it neo-recolonization of urban areas. First one's a little shorter, I guess. So we'll just call it gentrification. That is having massive cultural impacts on people. As a matter of fact, an amazing Black MD PhD. I don't know how people can get both an MD and a PhD, but her name is Dr. Mindy Foley Love. She's written two amazing books. One is called Urban Alchemy. The other one is called Root Shock. And Root Shock is and her MD and PhD are in psychiatry. She coined the phrase root shock for the massive feeling of trauma that sticks with you when you're uprooted from your community. So that's Black people in Harlem and Bed-Stuy, and that's Palestinian people in the occupied West Bank. And I don't think Coates, it's not that it was his job. I'm just saying that like really didn't get into that aspect of it. And then that's, just obviously access to water. And here's another thing, like Israel has recently been targeting solar panels, which are like the major source like of electricity for Palestinians who refuse to buy their electricity from Israel for exorbitant prices. Let me come back to that, because what I forgot to say about the gentleman's house that was demolished, he has to pay the Israeli government $15,000, which was the cost of demolishing his home. And if he doesn't pay it in 30 days, he goes to prison for 6 months. And when he's released after those 6 months, he still has to pay the $15,000, or he will go back to prison. So there's that psychological element. Remember the same thing, Nazis making Jewish people dig their own graves before they shot them. It comes from the exact same place, in my opinion. Last thing I'll say, because I'm like at like 19 minutes, is that a gun was pulled on us in Hebron by an Israeli settler. And that was definitely a take-home experience, and became more chagrined when he found out that I was Jewish, and I think that just didn't really understand that. So really what you're talking about is an era of Jim Crow. And this is what Coates gets right, where Southern vigilantes could with impunity kill or do whatever they wanted to a Black person that was in what we refer to as the Deep South. That situation still, that situation absolutely applies to the situation in Palestine right now. And I think that I will just end on saying that, cause for ceasefire is very important. That's strategically what we've been asked to remain in solidarity with. But as someone said to me while we were over there, it was like, please don't standing rock Palestine. And what he meant by that is like, there's going to eventually be a ceasefire. But if we stop all of our organizing and our outrage, the situations that led to 10-7 are still going to be there. The ceasefire is the bare minimum. An end to the occupation, Palestinian dignity and self-determination are key. Like there has to be a sorting of what we're going to do with these folk as it pertains to their agency, or this cycle is absolutely going to continue, and eventually one side is going to slaughter the other one, and that's not what any of us want to see. So I'll stop there, and let's like take questions and get into discussions. And thanks for letting me blab for like 20 minutes.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Barbara and I are going to be leading the conversation, facilitating it. Barbara, I just want to see if you have anything that's sticking with you. If not, I can.
Uh, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, Anthony, wow. Just thanks so much. And I appreciate the environmental rootedness that you were speaking to. I heard a fact or somebody speaking on this the other day about war itself is environmental and ecological devastation. Just one, they were talking about primarily from like the bombing standpoint of like the gases that are released from bombing and just comparing the amount of bombs that have been dropped. Apparently, it was like they said it was like 20 tons of bombs were dropped during like the Iraq War, and during this time, occupation of Palestine, it's been around 80 to 90,000 pounds of bombs dropped, and that equals like to, I think it's like 12 years of emissions or something like that, of like cars from around the world. So it's just you may know those stats a little bit more precisely, but just speaking to the like environmental aspects of like, oh yeah, we're so green, kind of this idea that, and that Israel thinks they're doing something good, and yeah, I just feel that the environmental impact is we're going to be impacted by it all around the world because of this, and so feeling that collective impact, that global impact is. I mean, that message I think is really important, and it goes far to understand how we're caring for our global community. Yeah, and I think just that last part, what were you sharing about the man that you met that lost his home and that process, it just reminded me of just the indentured servitude and the cycle of mass. I mean, what new Jim Crow, mass incarceration, but just enslavement in general. Like that, it is just the system being duplicated as you highlighted so clearly for us. So yeah, I'll let Barbara speak to something. Thank you.
Well, I don't, Anthony, did you want to respond to that first?
Oh no, everything that Matt said is spot on. I mean, you know, come from sort of, or at least correspond with a lot of mainstream environmental groups. I mean, Bill McKibben and I lost our relationship over this situation because
Ooh.
I told him that the mainstream environmental movement's silence on this issue is both morally bankrupt and strategic folly. Right.
Yep.
This is definitely a climate issue. The displacement
Good
of
for
people is
you.
a climate issue. Yeah, no, Bill and I don't talk anymore, and that's fine. But I mean, it has been really shocking to me watching these green groups, and politics aside, but they seem more concerned with preservation of a political party that's not doing the greatest things right now than they are with preservation of life and the planet. And
That's
and
right.
that's just not that cannot be accepted, right? That is unacceptable, and they must be called out on this, because if there is a silver lining, this should be one of those moments where all silos are busted down, right? Labor, environmental, medical, education, this is like form like Voltron time, because the intersections, as Kimberly Crenshaw taught us, are just so like explicit, that if you are like not seeing the intersections, that is not willful ignorance at this point. That is a choice that you have made, and if that is the choice that you have made, there needs to be consequences for that choice.
Mhm.
I would,
I had a question as you were saying that COP16 was just in Colombia a couple weeks ago, and was Palestine talked about at COP16, or were you involved in that? How has that been received? Being that's
Yeah,
kind of
no, I mean,
the
Colombia, of course, has a leftist government led by the president Gustavo Petro. There are no, and there have not been any Israeli diplomats in the republic for many months. The vice president and the president have been explicit, so it was discussed, but because this was sort of like the biodiversity COP. I think we will probably see, unless it's repressed, of course, in Azerbaijan in a few weeks, which is the climate change COP, which has more people. I think we'll see more pronouncement of Palestinian solidarity there. But of course, they're going to a country that is a very repressive government. So I don't think we're going to see as much of it as we will probably would have seen if it was, say, here. If this was the climate COP this year, the streets would be flooded. I mean, the streets are flooded with pro-Palestinian art, propaganda, and everything. This country is in inexorable solidarity with it, but it wasn't a major topic. Unfortunately, what was a major topic was the self-agency of Afro-descendant people. That was denied. And there were Afro-descendant people who were likening that to the same plight as the Palestinians.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Let's open it up to other people for some questions. Anybody have any questions for Anthony?
Yeah,
David does. Yeah.
yeah, I'll chime in. Anthony, thank you so much. I could listen to you all day, I think. And thank you.
Wait, can I record him saying that? I want to play that for my partner. I want her to hear him say that.
Yeah, this is recorded. I am on record. And also, thank you for what you do. Yeah, it would be a better world if we had more people with your courage to do the things you do. A lot of us talk the talk, but you're clearly walking the walk. I had two questions. One I feel is almost frivolous, and the other I think is substantive. The almost frivolous question is this may be an unfair question for you, and I ask it because it's certainly outside of my purview. I'm a physician, and the doctors often say, if it walks like a duck and swims like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck, and that's fine by me. But there is a technical legal definition of genocide, and so I wonder if you would comment on whether. I mean, I'm sure there. I bet, I don't know for sure, but I bet it's the policy of our government that this in fact, doesn't meet the legal criteria, because I don't think we're allowed to support genocides. That's the almost frivolous question, because, as I say, for me, I don't need to delve into technicalities. This clearly walks like a duck and swims like a duck and quacks like a duck. So for me, it's a genocide. But the deeper question is, because this is being carried out by the Jewish state, how does it impact your faith as a Jew?
I love the question. I want to and there are no frivolous questions, by the way. My mother was a professor, and her ethos was the stupidest question is the one not asked. And like, I'm from Brooklyn. The only thing that has offended me recently is that the Yankees lost to the Dodgers in 5 games. Like that's like, that no, come on, Jade. Too soon. I'm hurting. You're supposed to be Christians. Like, show me love. But no. I first of all, I want to say, speaking of Christians, that in the climate fight, my most ardent friends are Christian people who have taken this fight on. The Climate Disobedience Center, which was co-founded by my ride or die, Marla Markham, who is a Unitarian minister. Like Marla and I, like a 10-year relationship that's included yelling at each other but like, she is my family. Like we were brought together by God. Clearly, this is a white woman from the Ozarks and a dreadlock, loudmouth brother from Brooklyn are now inseparable. So the Christians have been doing incredible work in what we refer to in Jewish circles as tikkun olam, which is repairing the world. And what I would say is that I think what has driven Christianity, I would tell you what Marla has said, just about structures. Marla has one of my favorite quotes, and sort of, she was like, this is my sort of like approach to Jesus. And when she said this, I was just bawling. And she's like, we have to be, brave enough to let things get broken into tiny little pieces and strong enough to build something together again that's better and more sacred collectively. She was like, that's what Jesus was. And I was like, that's word. Anyway, to your questions. So I make it very clear, David, to separate what the Israeli government is doing from my faith. That is not Judaism that we are saying. That is Israelism. And Israelism is completely antithetical to numerous tenets and precepts of Judaism, like nothing to do with it. I mean, we all know, and thank you all, by the way, for making a New Testament, because the old one's pretty messed up. Like, I mean, this is a really vengeful, like, pubescent God. And Jews who are honest will tell you, like, we read the New Testament sometimes just so that we can talk to God, because it's just like, yo, like, you were genocidal, like the climate crises of, like, epic proportions and whatnot. So that's not Judaism, though. I mean, Judaism is also like this beautiful story of redemption, of liberation and whatnot, David. And what I will say is that, like, I could not celebrate Passover last year, right? Because of what was being done in the name of Judaism. I mean, imagine a Black Jew sitting at a table with the best food that you will eat all year, while the Jewish state is taking part in starvation tactics and eating this food while singing songs about liberation. It was impossible. And our mutual God, but Hashem, does say, like, if you are distracted, do not pray. You are not to pray and when you are distracted. Now, some of us Jewish people have taken that to a bad extent, where we have to separate ourselves from women when we pray, because it's women's fault somehow that we're distracted. I mean, I pray better when I'm with my partner. So, like, but I couldn't do it. And I think that was like the first challenge of faith that I had. And that's when it became clear to me that this is not Israelism. There's just nothing in our Torah. Once we're emancipated, as a matter of fact, there are mitzvot that says not to do what's happening right now. Pure scripture saying that, like, if you do, if you mistreat your opponent this bad, I will start to hear from them more than I hear from you. And I will, in hearing them, I will turn the sword like upon you. So it's just antithetical to my faith. And as I learned from a Palestinian reverend, Reverend Isaac, of course, who's got the Lutheran parish, world famous Lutheran parish in Bethlehem. My God doesn't discriminate against anybody, he said. My God doesn't discriminate against anybody, and that's damn right. Like, and so I think that what I've resolved myself to, David, is that it is my faith that commands me to be extremely critical of what the state of Israel has been and is doing now. That is driven by my faith more than anything else, right? Like, I mean, that said, I still do have dreams one day of celebrating Passover in Las Vegas at the Luxor casino, and then doing Seder, and then all of us running out of the Luxor at the end of dinner. One day we'll make that happen. But no, it's not a crisis of faith. It's a crisis of identity. That and as Christians, y'all know this as well as anyone, what our faiths have been used to commit. No, colonization and genocides of entire people for land, chattel slavery. That was a bastardization and an adulteration. And as my Marla would say, she says, that kind of behavior, Anthony, is almost unforgivable. I love that about her.
Thank you for that. I love that response.
Judy has had her hand up.
Judy,
Judy.
yes,
Yeah,
Hi, Judy.
And I ditto what David said, Anthony. I could listen to you all day, and I really appreciate the way that you connect all these different things. I think that Israel and Palestine were places that were shocking to me. They were so ugly, and they had been so destroyed environmentally. But for selfish reasons, I have to go in about 2 minutes. I'm late for a class I'm committed to with Pir Zia, who is a Sufi teacher. And I and leaving on Tuesday through Jordan, and you said it was really chaotic there. So is there anything you can share about
No. Jordan is great. I mean, right from when you get to the airport, it's a beautiful airport. I mean, it's a very modern, Arab
the
state. I mean,
customs were crazy for you guys?
no. That was
No.
getting into Israel from Jordan. I
Right.
mean, right. Like once you get over the King Hussein Bridge and you get into Israeli territory, you can feel it. I mean, Jordan, like they're like laughing with you. Even when we came back into Jordan, the border people were laughing and no, but Israel is rightfully extremely defensive right now of who's coming into their country and why. And so you'll get some questions and they have their tactics, but Jordan, you're gonna have a blast. These are amazing, lovely people.
Thank you. And thank you for the Sabine tour. I hope to do that one day myself. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I highly
thank you
recommend it. It
for
was amazing.
your incredible, inclusive, multifaceted presentation. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Judith. Okay, Brigitte has had her hand up.
Good morning. It was such a pleasure to hear what you had to say today. I really appreciated everything, and I agree with everything. But I have to say that right now I'm really struggling with this election coming up. I am conflicted. I am really conflicted. And so I know that you've done some work in policy and analysis and all this. Do you have any advice on how to make a rational decision?
Look, I mean, I voted before I left the country because I'm going to be here in Colombia for election day, and I think that your vote is your voice, and I think your voice is extremely valid. I think we all, children of God, our voices, that validity is instilled in us by a powerful force that no mortal can deny that God has given us each this voice, and we vote with it. I have never done anything with from a lens of fear. My mother taught me fear leads to hesitation, and hesitation leads to the thing that you fear the most. And that was good advice for a kid who played third base in baseball, because balls tend to come at you very fast, and being fearful leads to very bad things. Um, I hate the fact that this is the position that we're in, as a nation with the choices, that we have. I don't think that either of the values of the mainstream candidates align with Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, any values of righteousness, which all of our faiths, I believe, at first and foremost, are rooted in. And I think that if the outcome is, that Trump does become president again, and that's the fact that is likely, in itself is a problem, and that to me is like that's work that has nothing to do with policy and politics. This is, human to human problems that we are just like way too divided right now, where there isn't enough consensus that a person like this should probably not be in charge of, economic decisions, military decisions that are going to impact marginalized, people, be they people of color, be they women, and be they LGBTQIA people. So what's the work that we have to do there is what I think of, because whether Trump wins or loses, Trumpism is here. Trumpism is in the fabric of the United States of America right now. And there is no law that we can pass that is going to change that, right? Laws do not change attitudes. Attitudes change laws, right? How many attitudes were changed, when people like Mickey Schwerner and Andy Goodman, two Jewish men, saw what was happening in the South, as well as plenty of white Christian people. And it's like, this is unacceptable. This is so antithetical to my the fabric of my faith and who I am and my voice, that I cannot sit here and watch it happen. And so there's a part of me that if Trump wins, that comes out of us more. I want to see that more anyway, because even if Harris wins, we know immigrant people are still going to not feel super safe. Trans people are not going to feel safe. Some women who do not have economic means are not going to feel safe. Black, brown, and indigenous people are not going to feel as safe as they ought to and deserve to be. And so that's our work. And I think that I would rather you not vote, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but commit to that work than commit to voting, and then after you vote, not do any of that work. I think that the long-term commitment to the work that needs to be done to end this manufactured styrofoam bifurcation based on anything that oppression can find to divide us, race, gender, economic status, Mets or Yankees, like whatever it can. We got to do something about the Mets fans. Like we hold, space for them too. But that's my thing. I did not. Doesn't matter now. I did not vote for Kamala Harris. I couldn't do it. It was just not possible for me to do so. I voted third party because I have to look you in the eyes. I have to look the Palestinian people who I love in the eyes. I have to look my son, who's 9 years old, Zaire, in the eyes. He's going to ask what I did, in this moment. These 9-year-olds, they are way more precocious than I remember them being when I was 9. It's just nuts, the information that they have access to and that they retain. Zaire knows what's going on. He knows that kids his age do not have the lifestyle that he has and don't have parents anymore. And he's old enough to understand, even though I think he would like to off me sometimes, but like he loves his parents, and he said to me, like, I can't understand anyone who would not stop kids from losing their parents, daddy. Like that's what would I do? And I'm like, like yes, little man. I don't make it a habit of telling people how to remove their oppressors, and I don't make it a habit of telling people how to vote. There are people who are going to vote for Trump who I love and who I'm going to work with, on the things that we can work on together. And this includes farmers that I work with in rural Nebraska, getting them off of industrial models of agriculture to become more sustainable with regenerative agricultural practices. I'm going to still work with them, and I'm still going to eat with them, after this election. So it's a long-winded answer, but it's been a very painful one. And I would like to feel, even though I'm not an Obama fan anymore, but I want to feel, and I want my son to feel like I did the first time I voted for Obama in 2008. Little did I know what was going to happen, but that feeling again has been missing from all of us. And the idea that we're either voting to prevent harm or voting to continue harm, however you believe, but not voting because you're like, yes, this that's not going to get more people to vote. So I want to get the conditions together. But what I will say, Brigitte, it's not just the presidency. You've got local elections, and you've got state wide elections and county wide elections, school boards, public service commissions, county commissioners who have so much of an impact in our daily lives. I lived in Seattle when Trump first won, and we formed a force field, for people who could be impacted by ICE. Our port commissioners had to even hey, what are you going to do to stop the proliferation of fossil fuels? And we shut down the port of Seattle for Shell and Exxon. So they couldn't use that port anymore. And it screwed them up big time. So if you need to leave the presidency blank, that's fine. I would say, please pay attention to the local elections, because that might be what is our only mechanism of power that we build up from, rather than it being top down. These cities and these counties have immense power and immense ability to affect your everyday life. Sorry,
Anthony,
that was a lot.
Anthony, thank you for that. Scott is next, but let me just insert here just to underscore how panicky this moment is. And we need to absorb the fact that this is a panicky moment and not try to brush it off. But the fact that it's a panicked moment to the point that I know that I have alarmed some people because I have refused to make a public endorsement. And people completely forgot that church leaders are not allowed to make public endorsements. You know, I mean, I found resistance on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram because but I mean, it jeopardizes your nonprofit status. So you're not even supposed to do it, but it just underscores how panicked we are. We're desperate for people to lean in our direction publicly. And so that's why we have so many celebrities coming on board, right? All right, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, Anthony, I think you're terrific. And I wish you had a daily segment on Democracy Now! Seriously.
I have a radio show that airs at 6 o'clock p.m. I'll send all of it to David. It's called Full Spectrum with Anthony Rogers-Wright. Please listen to it. Public radio. Yes.
Awesome. I also felt and had to vote for a third party. Actually, it was Jill Stein. Here's my question for you, though. Since you have such insight and you've been on the ground, even if everything stopped, the bombing stopped today, has it all gone too far to put back together? I mean, the hate, which is valid in this case, the fear and everything that's happened, and even the rebuilding. I'm just, where's your heart on that, in your mind?
It would have been in the same place where if I'm hearing you correctly, where you are now. And the example that I have and I think that this is what Palestinians and Israelis are going to have to do. We all know about the just horrendous, inhumane activities that people did to each other in the Rwanda, episode of just massive inhumanity, being shooting people and then taking bullets out of their corpses because those people were so dehumanized. A mother whose son was taken by one of the rebels who was against his mother, and the guy who killed her son, they now travel the world together as part of the outcome of their truth and reconciliation process, and they love each other like immensely. And the mother was basically like, in their truth and reconciliation, you've taken my son away from me, so now I'm your mother, and you have to embrace me as your mother. And they did, and that's what's going to have to happen, Scott. Like this is not going to be solved militarily or just like diplomatically. Young Palestinians who have been ripped of their parents and of their childhood need somewhere for these grievances to be pronounced in a fruitful way. Otherwise, it's just going to lead to something really devastating if it's kept in. What that mechanism looks like, I don't know. But what I do know is that these two people have lived together in peace before. Right, under the Ottoman Empire, and even before that, it wasn't until the Western interference that like this visceral hatred was engendered. So it's not something that they were born with. It's something. It's a part of the decolonization process. But if this Rwandan woman and man, after everything they've done to each other, can so travel the world and like they hug and hold hands and everything. Because I don't know how I would react to the person who killed my son, which is, thank God, like why we need to get rid of the death penalty, by the way, and like things like that, because I should never make that decision. But it like for these two people to do what they're doing is a beacon, and it can be replicated because we're just human beings, like really like sinful, like animals with more advanced brains that do a lot of stupid things. And salvation is always available. So y'all know this as well as we do as Jewish people. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be perfect, but any process that is going to heal human beings also has to be given some providence for its imperfections, right? As well, because this is going to be tough. Scott, excuse me. This is going to be really, really tough. I could not look any Palestinian 8-year-old kid who is now essentially the patriarch for 4 of his brothers and sisters at 8 or 9 and tell him, just forget about it, move on and whatnot. Childhood ripped away, adulthood maybe ripped away, dreams ripped away, family ripped away. There was that, it was an abbreviation that the UN was using both wounded, no living parents, that like to classify some of these kids, right? And that's horrendous. But they're like when we break through the layers of confusion and anger and hate, and we don't we don't devalue that, or we don't delegitimize those feelings. Those are valid feelings, you know. This mother and son were able to do it. So how can we replicate it? They were kind of able to do it in South Africa as well, right? It did not turn into this massive like killing spree of white people by oppressed Black people after apartheid was officially dismantled. There was a truth and reconciliation process, just like there was a truth and reconciliation process here in Colombia after all the rebel fighting, right? Of things that the rebels did that were like just not aligned with what good humans do, and what the governments did as well. And so it can happen. It's going to happen. The two governments, some of the governments that are way too involved in this aren't the governments that need to lead that process. Like we cannot have a US government that is too bought by AIPAC to take part in that. And we certainly cannot allow for a right-wing fanatical government of Bibi the Butcher Netanyahu take a part of that. Those gotta go, somehow. And probably people like Africans, like indigenous people, like are going to have to come in with all the resources that they need from the UN for that human element. But governments, governments aren't going to be able to do that.
Well,
We're gonna, yeah.
Robina,
Yeah, I've got like
Wait.
5 to 8 more minutes because my
Yeah.
mentor is sitting right here and he's
So-
giving me the look of the devil because
Okay.
he's hungry and we're supposed to go
Robina
eat.
has been waiting though.
So this will
Yeah,
be
no,
our,
no,
la-
yeah.
our
And if
last
there's more
one.
hands up,
Robina will have the last question.
And let me just
So,
say, David, I'm sending you
I'm going to be a
resources. Oh, really
sorry.
quickly, Rabina, I'm sending you resources. Please send my email to everyone and just send me emails. Like, yeah, this isn't like the last time you're ever going to have access to me.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I want to hear what Robina has to say too.
So I'm going to be as short as I can. Anthony, you, in my mind, represent what I grew up with, what a Jewish person looks like. I grew up in Pakistan, and my first introduction to a Jewish family was a brown family. I think it's easier for some of us to distinguish between what the state of Israel is and what the faith of a Jewish person is, because we understand that whiteness was not part of being Jewish. So I'll stop there.
No, thank you. And while we're doing that, let's lift up El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, who became El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz when he transformed yet again while praying next to white Muslims, who he was previously told it was impossible. So thank you, Rabina. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. And yes, the Black and brown Jews, we're not like, X-Files aliens. We're out there. We're the majority. If we look up, Charlton Heston looked more like us than Jerry Seinfeld, I like to say. I'm saying Moses. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I messed that up. Moses looked more like us than Jerry Seinfeld and Charlton Heston. That's the lie.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And I'll say this before Roy leads us in communion to close our time. Having grown up in San Francisco, I join you. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the Yankees should have won. That's all. Sorry about that. I know I'm amongst a lot of Dodgers fans here, so I may be jeopardizing my relationship here in Southern California.
Thank you, everybody. Let's stay in touch. I'm gonna roll. Y'all have been amazing, and yeah, just the beginning. I'll say a Wiedersehen instead of a goodbye until I see you next.
Again, I'm struck by this metaphor that we join in today, this metaphor of communion. And those words that Anthony spoke, shared from his friend Marla, that we must be brave enough to see things broken into many, many tiny pieces and then committed enough to put them back together and build something better. On the night when Jesus was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body broken for you." And here we are, broken in many, many pieces. And yet, that is not the end. Take the broken bread and eat. And after supper, he took the cup and said, "This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you. Take and drink." As we go forward, let us be brave enough to be broken and be committed enough to take those broken pieces and, through the love and grace of God, rebuild the world as God intends it to be. Amen.
Amen. Have a wonderful rest of